Welcome back. Rob Kaplan, founder and partner at Kaplan, Vogler, Cunningham and Frank. I am yet again here with Ray Davis, Chief Business Development Officer at Reg A Capital Group. Let's talk a little about the nuts and bolts of going through the Reg A process, because I'm sure the folks out there watching this are saying, okay, all of this is valuable information, but how bad is this process really with the Securities and Exchange Commission? Well, I tell you what, let's do this. Why don't we start with your general impressions of the process with the firm and how your planning affected the process, and then I'll get into some of the nuts and bolts of all of this stuff.
Yeah, that sounds great, Rob. So we chose Reg A for a host of reasons, and one of those was because it took a significantly higher level of planning to execute at a very high level. And so we chose it on purpose. We said this is a way to separate ourselves from the competition while expanding our distribution base. So to us, it was, okay, it's harder to do, so let's take that approach. And as a young growing company, we were not opposed to having more controls, more restrictions put on our growth to make sure we're staying in our swim lane. So that's why we chose the Reg A Plus. Going through it, as I mentioned in a previous episode, we spent 9 months planning. We reviewed every policy, every procedure to make sure it was working. Right. We not only did our financial model, we redid our financial model probably 4 or 5 times through that whole engineering loop of saying, hey, is this working to solve our issues? But the actual process of going through it was just not difficult. I think our first one we did in 62 days, start to qualification. And people were telling us 6 months, 9 months. And the second one, I mean, you can speak to this point, Rob, but it just wasn't difficult. Like in the questions the SEC, the comments the SEC came back with, and the comments FINRA came back with, helped us improve. Right. Most people wouldn't take it that way because they see a slower time to market, but they actually made us think, saying, have we covered all bases?
So I think there's some really good points to unpack in there. The Regulation A process in and of itself is not terribly dissimilar from the process that you go through in registering an offering with the Securities and Exchange Commission. It's just really more streamlined and right-sized to the offering type. So we will prepare an initial offering statement, which is the Form 1A wrapper and the offering circular. The offering circular is the real meat and potatoes disclosure document. That will be filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Securities and Exchange Commission has 30 days to provide to you either a letter of no comment or initial comments to the offering disclosure. They are not substantively assessing your offering. So they're not looking at whether your offering is a good investment or not. They are trying to determine whether, one, you have complied with all legal requirements of the commission, and they're also trying to make sure that your disclosure is complete and easily understood by the investor. And so you'll get comments back from the SEC in 30 days that really relate around your disclosure. They may ask questions about, well, why do you think you're not an Investment Company Act of 40 company? Or, how does this method of distribution comply with substantive requirements under the 34 Act? There's not a ton of that. It's usually relating to disclosure. You say this here, what do you mean? Or you say this here and you say this here. You need to reconcile the two of them. And I will say, just as a side note, we did have our first Regulation A no comments letter from the SEC 2 weeks ago. So we have gotten it to a point where we have at least one offering where the SEC said no comments. Typically that process with the SEC can go on arguably indefinitely if you are not meeting their comments or providing them rationale why the comment should not stand. It is incredibly important, as much as planning the marketing side, to Ray's point, it is incredibly important to plan out, structure your financial models, all of the critical aspects of how we build the security in the early going. Because the more we can put into the document and do so very skillfully, the more likely we can address any comments or concerns of the SEC in those initial rounds in order to keep the process down. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have a management team that is focused on this process and is taking this very seriously and very professionally like you guys did. Now, I will say our law firm enjoys, along with an elite fraternity, if you will, I use that term loosely, of other law firms that we're involved in the process of revising Regulation A and working with the Commission on this stuff, in addition to having our own public securities practice, where we had this experience and skill sets where we could really sophisticate the disclosure. And working with the Commission pre-change on Regulation A offerings and post-change, we have found ourselves in a position that we probably see a lot more examples in real time in real world situations where the SEC may be focusing on some aspect of disclosure they're seeing or some aspect of how they're interpreting a regulation, that we can anticipate these things in our offerings. And so we typically tell people budget 90 days for the process. That includes preparation of the initial offering memorandum and offering circular, and the response and comment period, allowing 60 days for that. And that's been a change from when we started doing these things, where we were telling people 120 to 180 days. We're now down to a conservative budget of 90, and yeah, we are seeing deals move through the Commission in 45 days.
Yeah.
Again, experienced counsel is key. Anyone can make a filing with the Commission, but we have had clients come to us who have gone to their normal attorney, doesn't have securities experience, and they come to us after they've gone through 8 rounds with the SEC. And so it is critical to have that experience there. I think something we can also help with, and what was very important to your offerings, because we went with the bond structure, to your point about you were not afraid of additional controls or additional governance features on you. You know, a bond offering in the Regulation A context requires an indenture that you don't have to register under the Indenture Trust Act of 1939, but your indenture does have to meet certain substantive requirements of the Trust Indenture Act. And so that knowledge of that act and knowledge of how to structure those indentures, which is pretty unique stuff, was something else we brought to the table. But I think that was a powerful tool in your arsenal when you went out to the sales community. Was, look, we have an indenture trustee, an independent third party,
yes,
that's making sure we're complying with these covenants at all times.
Absolutely. Rob, there's a point that you didn't mention that I think is vastly important to the audience. Like the independent broker-dealer channel or any capital markets channel, the market's always changing, forever changing. The same thing I've noticed happens within the Reg A, within the SEC with Reg A's. It seems like every year, every so often, they're focused on something new.
Yes.
And you guys have been able to pick that up. And you didn't mention that acutely, but that's important. And you've kept us on the front edge of not having to deal with those because you guys were addressing them in advance.
Well, you know, look, there's a reason they call it the practice of law, and it's the same thing for my colleagues at the Securities and Exchange Commission. They'll see things over time, and they'll realize there's an issue, or they'll realize a question about how they're doing something. And you're absolutely right. That constant rapport with them and offerings and dealing with various regulatory matters, you know, they're busy people like anybody else. So they're not going to call me up on a regular basis and say, hey, just to let you know, we're dealing with issues like this right now. So having a vibrant practice in front of them where you can hear things real time, real situations, is important for that. I also think from a knowledgeable law firm perspective, Reg A does have unique requirements associated with it to maximize the flexibility of the offerings. So uses of transfer agents and whatnot. These things do have to be filed through the Edgar system. So I think another important aspect of this that we bring is a lot of the logistics of this, helping you to find printers, which are not really printers, they're Edgarization experts for the commission, transfer agents, indenture trust, any of those elements of the offering that may not be readily apparent out of the gate. We have the experience to, one, point issuers at the right people, and two, help them negotiate those agreements and ultimately keep the deal working in a very efficient manner.
That's a bigger deal than may appear on the surface, because as a new issuer, these third parties are very reluctant to work with you. So if you don't have a law firm that has a relationship, those relationships can be very hard to establish. I do have one point, Rob, that I think it's a little story. There's a current issuer in the market right now. They started 3 years ago with their first Reg A plus. They've since then had to stop it and try to reissue it 2 other times. And look, now it's been a total of 3 years. You can look on the SEC site and there's the versions of comments. The amount of comments are it's just absolutely insane because of the versions of I guess the supplements or additions to the Reg A.
Right.
Legal jargon you to provide.
Post-offering supplements or amendments.
Amendments. And look, their initial thought was, we're going to save $100,000 or some nominal number. I can tell you now, the cost of them not raising capital, the cost of having to switch law firms more than once, going with an experienced law firm, we found this invaluable, and I just can't be expressed enough here in this series that if you're trying to run a business, spending 3 years trying to make a Reg A happen is the most counterproductive thing you could do.
Yeah, no, I think it's well said. Look, Reg A is designed to allow people to access a public market and work with professionals that can be more cost effective than an Amjur 50 law firm.
Yeah.
But you've got to have experienced people who work with this every day. And to your point, I mean, we talked about load, folks, and load is a function of commission, but it's a function of a whole lot of different expenses. It's also a function of time.
Absolutely.
And time it's not your friend in this process if you let it get out of control.
Absolutely.
I think that takes care of talking about the initial offering in this installment. Again, if you have questions, my contact information is below. Also, feel free to reach out to myself or Ray or our colleague Nick Duran at Crescent Securities in the blog associated with this site. Thanks very much and look forward to talking to you again.